let's talk about that just for a little bit. And that was kind of on my mind anyway. And one verses kept coming to my mind, one I read a lot. I'm almost reluctant to read something that I know I've already read a lot, but it's a good verse, and it doesn't quit being good just because we've read it before. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, we read this. This is Jesus talking, and he's speaking to all of us or to anyone. And in verse 28, Matthew 11:28, he says, "Come to me." That's his invitation. "Come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." This is a lot like what Janet was just talking about. The labor and the heavy burden can really be anything, because in life there are all kinds of burdens that accumulate and all kinds of things. It can be mental, it can be worry, it can be stress, it can be fear, it can be all sorts of things. It can be a burden and something that causes us anxiety. And he says, "Come to me." Here's the solution, though. Here's what he says. "Come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." That's what he promises. He promised to give us rest. And the next verse, he says, he gets a little more specific about it. He says, "Take my yoke upon you, learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart." And he says again, "You will find rest for your souls." And he specifies, you'll find rest for your souls. Again, this is not news to you because I've mentioned it before and you might have already known it, but in the King James translation, there are words, we see the word soul and the word spirit sometimes, and we sort of think of them interchangeably, and in a way it's okay to do that because both soul and spirit are talking about on the inside of us, not the physical part of us. The body or the flesh is used to talk about our outer person. But on the inside, the invisible part sometimes is referred to by soul, sometimes by spirit, but different words are used, different Greek words are used. And the word that's used for soul, and Jesus here says you'll find rest for your souls, is the Greek word psyche, P-S-U-C-H-E, which looks like our English word psyche. And as a matter of fact, it means pretty much the same thing. You will find rest for your, and if you want to know what the psyche is or the soul is in this context, think about what it's easy to understand when we use the word psyche as a prefix for words like psychologist or psychiatrist. Now you know enough about life to know what a psychologist and what a psychiatrist specializes in, what they study and what they treat. The mind and the emotions and that part of us. People that have problems with emotional problems or mental disorders, they'll go to a psychiatrist or psychologist, and then they help them as they can. But here Jesus is talking about that part of us. And he says, if you come to me, now I'm not down on anybody. I'm glad for any place anyone can find help. But you know, any human being is limited. We're limited. But Jesus is not limited. And he invites us to come to him with our labor and our heavy burdens, and he says, I'll in exchange give you rest. Now that's his promise. I don't know how to do it. I can't give you rest, but he says, I will give you rest. Jesus does. He says, come to me and I will give you rest. And then not only that, in verse 29 he says, you'll find rest for your psyche, for your soul, for your mind and your emotions. And that part of us that is prone to getting filled with fear and anxiety and care and concern, and those kinds of reactions are natural. Isn't that right? I mean, it's natural that we have concern for ourselves, for other people. It's natural to have intense concern and care for other people. In fact, that kind of concern can develop into worry and anxiety and becomes unhealthy, as Janet just got through saying, and damaging to us. I think doctors have studied this, and I don't think I'm telling you something that's far-fetched at all to say stress and worry are damaging to you physically. Not just to your, not just keep you awake at night, but you can get ulcers from worrying, they say. And not only that, I think they've found other health-related problems. I should ask Troy. You probably know more about the medical things. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard anything about? Because you used to, do the EMT work.
Just ulcers, I guess.
Yeah, they probably don't call the ambulance to treat stress and anxiety, do they?
They do sometimes.
Do they really?
Some people, they get so stressed out, they're taking medication for it.
Oh, I see.
Hyperventilating.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, so I'm not so far off after all. Huh?
Yeah, there's quite a few.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, anyway, Jesus gives the invitation, and the invitation is open to everybody to come to him and find relief or find rest, he says. Rest is a beautiful word, I think. Yes. And it doesn't just mean to lay down in the bed and take a nap, though I'm all for that. I'm not down on that either. we keep pretty late hours during the week, and I'm glad when Sunday comes because generally on Sunday afternoon, nothing has to happen, so it's a good time to take a nap, but to catch up on my sleep that I missed all through the week. Get up early, go to bed late. But anyway, that's fine, but there's another kind of rest that we need just as much, which is to rest our minds, to rest our emotions, and Jesus promises to give us that. But here's the thing he says to do. It's not just be passive. He says, come to me. Now, we usually think of this when he says, come to me in verse 28. We think of it generally in terms of a person who's not a Christian. We give invitations at church sometimes. We call it that. For people who are not saved, people who are not Christians, to come to Jesus. And that's okay to do that. That's fine. That's a good thing to do that. I did that at the at BJCC just last week, and we had 20 or 30 men that came to the front. And sometimes I think, I wonder if that's embarrassing to them to get up in front of all their friends, but I guess not, because they did. They all stood up, came to the front. I asked them to do that. I think it's important to, stand up and come up to the front, make it official, sort of, in a way. 20, 30 men responded. I was really happy about that. But we that are already Christians, we also can come to him with our cares and our concerns and the things that are whatever it might be that fits this category of labor and heavy laden and burdens and so forth. So I wanted to look at a few examples of just as an encouragement to us, some people who did come to Jesus, and see that they got what they needed. The first one is in Matthew chapter 8. I'd like to read. And it says this, verse 1. Here we were in chapter 11, so I'm just backing up a little bit. When he was come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, there came a leper, and worshipped him. And he said, Lord, if you will, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. Now this is good, what he said. He believed that if he would, he could. Now I think generally speaking, most people believe that about God, that he can do what he wants to do. That's what he's basically. If you want to, you can make me clean. I think generally people believe that about God and about Jesus. And they leave it there, though. See, that's you got to go one step beyond that. I think most people would agree that God can do what he wants to do. But this leper was not content to just sit back and say, well, God can do what he wants to do. He got up and he came to Jesus, like that invitation we just read. You notice he came to him. He said, if you will, you can make me clean. Evidently, he wasn't quite sure, if he would, if he did want to. He said, if you do want to, you can. He knew he could. So Jesus settled it for him, and I think for everybody. You know why I say in verse 3, why I say that Jesus settled this, not just for this leper, but for everybody, is because we're told in the Scripture that God is no respecter of persons. That means he doesn't treat one person different than another. That's what that means. He doesn't select somebody and say, you get my favor, but I'll ignore you. He treats us all the same. That's what it means. He is no respecter of persons. He doesn't have any favorites. That's what that means. So, when I say in verse 3, the question of whether he wants to, when the leper said, if you will, you can, sometimes we have that question in our minds. This should settle it for us, because if he said it to this leper, he would say it to us as well. Verse 3, Jesus put forth his hand and touched him. And he said, I will. See, the leper said, if you will. He said, okay, I will. I want you to know that I do. I will. Be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Well, for this leper, his burden and his labor and his heavy, burden was his leprosy. That was the thing that was, I'm sure, first and foremost in his mind. And but he didn't just, this is the point I want to make, he didn't just sit back and say, well, I've heard Jesus, and I know if he wants to, he can, and I've heard good things about him, and I know if he wants, he got up and came to him. Now, don't get the idea we need to get up and physically go somewhere. We don't have to go to Tulsa to find Jesus. He's near to us at all times. I only say that in a laughing kind of way because I used to kind of feel like that if I really want to get some, I need to go to a big meeting somewhere, but you don't have to go to a big meeting. And you're not going to get it necessarily from a man. It's from Jesus. He said, come to me. So Jesus settled it. The man said, if you will, you can. Jesus said, look at what else he did. He didn't just say, he did something. Jesus put forth his hand and touched him. Isn't that beautiful? Jesus, he reached out and touched him. I think that's, if he were here physically, he would do the same for all of us. He's not here physically, but he's here by his